Good morning, everyone who's already online. This is Marian from the Water Use Network. We'll start in a few minutes. Let's wait for more people to come, and then at 4 p.m. we'll start.
You
Hi, everyone. So this is Marian from Water Use Network. I'm the co-coordinator for the WASH working group. We'll wait a few more minutes to give people some time to log on. I think we'll start in about 2 minutes. Thank you for your patience.
What do you mean?
Hi everyone. I think we'll start, and as we are doing the presentation, people might pop in again. So my name is Marian. I'm the co-coordinator for the WASH working group at Water Use Network, and I'm gonna be the host of this webinar. What does that mean is that I'm gonna manage all the entry of people in the webinar, and also I'm gonna manage the chat. So how this is gonna work, so we're gonna have Neil, Dhot, which Rebecca is gonna introduce, speaking, and then as he's doing his presentation, you can ask questions that we will answer at the end. So you can ask question, you see on top you have a bar, you go to more, you have a chat box. In this chat box, you can write your question. I'm gonna be reading them and noting them for the end of the webinar when Neil is going to be able to answer all the questions that you may have. Meanwhile, we're doing presentation. You can maybe write your name in the chat box and saying where you are listening us from. So I will introduce you to Rebecca. Rebecca is the coordinator of the WASH working group, so we are doing the coordination together. Rebecca, I don't see your mic appearing. So Rebecca, I don't know if your mic is working or not, if you can unmute yourself and start to speak. Okay, well, I'm just gonna go and introduce Neil, maybe. Okay, so Rebecca doesn't have her mic working. Rebecca is in the Netherlands right now. She is the coordinator of the WASH working group. We do work together towards this work. So the Water Use Network is a network that was created about 6 years ago, and we work in connecting use groups on water issues. So what we're doing today is one of our goals to spread the message, to spread the good practices and knowledge around water. And especially for the WASH working group, we work closely with organization, people and youth around the world to connect them with water, sanitation, and hygiene issues. So this is the second webinar that we're organizing, and we're gonna have Neil Dhot, who's the Executive Director of AquaFeds. So Neil, I'm going to unmute yourself, and you can maybe share your screen.
Okay, yeah, hi.
So I'm gonna liberate the screen so you can share yours.
All right, fine. Hi everyone, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Hope you can all hear me okay. Marian, thank you very much for your introduction. I'm just going to now see if I can manage the technology and share my screen, because I'm feeling...
You just go at the bottom and you have a share that's green.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do that now. Marian, just as I was talking, my icon seems to have completely disappeared. Where are you? Sorry guys, bear with me 1 second. Okay, here we go, everyone. Marion, can I ask you a favour, please? Would you just change the slides as we're going along for me? Because
yes, I can do that for you.
Thank you. I'm very sorry, everyone. Just as you need to. Yeah. Okay. So, Marion, if you could jump to the second slide, please, which is a little picture of me on.
Yeah.
Right, let's go, everyone. Apologies for that. You can tell I've reached the age of over 42, and the ability to manage technology is now completely beyond me. So welcome and thanks once again for giving up your Sunday. I'd say from the outset, I intend to not speak for very long because I don't like it when people talk to me or talk at me for too long. I'd much rather we keep this discussion based. I know we're going to wait for questions until the end, but I intend to cover some ground quite quickly. I also ask for your forgiveness in the background if you hear little voices. Children under 10 simply do not understand the meaning of "can you be quiet for 1 hour, please?" So you may hear some noise from the background, but it's them, they're watching the football. Okay, so who am I? My name's Neil Dhot, as Marion has explains, and I'm the Executive Director of AquaFed. AquaFed is the International Federation of Private Water Operators, and I'll explain a bit more about who they are in a second, because that's kind of half the point of this presentation. But it's private companies that operate utility services, particularly water and sanitation. So some of them you may have heard of, such as Suez and Veolia. They're the two biggest companies in the world, both French, and I represent them. So it's a federation of very, very large multinational private water and sanitation operating companies, and also companies that say in Uganda, for example, that serve maybe 1,000 or 2,000 on a small water network. So it's a hugely diverse range of companies that I represent. So the issues are very diverse as well, and geographically we have members from all over the world. So that makes it very interesting, but also difficult sometimes to know where we need to focus our efforts. So AquaFed is, like I said, it's a federation or a membership association. We don't actually get into any operations ourselves. Our member companies do that. But we are meant to be their voice, and their voice to policymakers, to governments, to stakeholders. And it's just to make sure that our guys who are on the ground working on behalf of public authorities and municipalities every day, to make sure that our experience and our expertise is shared in the mix of trying to meet these SDG goals that we're all kind of, at the moment struggling to achieve, which is a bit sad. So we contribute very much to policy and sector development, not very technical and operational, very much, few issues from time to time, but not very much. And we try not to overlap with organisations such as the International Water Association, the IWA, who are much more technically minded. I was really, really delighted to get this opportunity to talk to you all, and I was actually pushing and harassing the network for it, because the number of reasons. Number one, I don't want to sound corny or cheesy, but the youth and people like you are the future of the sector. It's not people like me who are getting on a bit already. I don't think we know that we have got a big shortage of engineers and technicians and skilled young people who are going to make the difference and who are going to fix SDG 6 in the next 10 to 15 years. We're lacking in those. So, you are very, very, very important people, probably more than you realise, I'd say, actually. And the other thing really is I still find, sadly, that there's a lot of common misunderstandings and things people hear about the private sector that are either misguided or just plain wrong. So that's why I'm going to focus quite a lot on busting some myths today and trying to give you a bit of reality, or certainly an alternative view to what you may have heard in the past. So voila, that's where we are with that. Okay, Marion, next slide, please. Thank you very much. So as I said earlier, it's very much a discussion and debate. It's not a lecture from me at all. I'm essentially going to do two things. I'm going to try and just lay out the landscape of the private sector within water and sanitation and all the different parts. Now, I'm making a big assumption that some of you aren't from the private sector, so I'm not sure. So forgive me if some of you already do know this, and I don't wish to kind of go over things or patronize you in any way. I'm just making an assumption that I'm starting from a kind of low base of knowledge there, okay? So I'm just going to try to be very simplistic view of the different private sector players and who they are. And then, as I said before, I think it's really, really important that we do a bit of myth busting and talk about things like the human rights, water and sanitation, a bit about prices and tariffs and how they're set as well, and what we actually mean by profit, because that's another thing that gets thrown at me and our members all the time. And I think I need to explain what a profit actually is and what happens with the money and how we actually even make a profit if we can in the first place. Okay. So I'll just take a pause there for a second. And Marion, if you wouldn't mind, if you could please change to the next slide. Thank you very much. All right, so voila, the first part of this little presentation is about the private sector landscape, and there's kind of 4 different types or 4 different kind of groupings that I've selected. So the first one is us, is the AquaFed members, and I say we are private water operators. So, and to be clear right from the start, we work on behalf of or on the call of public authorities, municipalities, regional governments, okay? We work under contract from them. We are a service supplier to the government or the public authority in charge. So straight away, it's absolutely essential, I think, a key point that you know, that when you have private water or sanitation operators, we are following what's been contractually agreed with the public authority. And it's the public authority that retain full control and ownership of water. You may have heard that, you know, with privatization, there's this claim that, look, you know, they're taking up, these companies are taking our water away, and they're you know, when we don't own the water, and it becomes very, very ideological. But with my members and what AquaFed members do is we work on behalf of the public authority. So the water, as it, you know, anywhere in the world, the water belongs to the people. That means you and me as people and society. It's society's water, it's the public's water, and it should be there for everyone. It's not by us. So I just wanted to be very, very clear about that. I've got public-private partnerships as the first bullet point there, and these are the way. This is the way in which our members operate. You know, and as the title suggests, they are partnerships between a public authority and a private company. Now, the contracts that we sign, there are different types of contracts involved. I'm not going to go too much into it now, as I don't want to go into too much detail, but perhaps you can ask me questions on that later. But let me give you a sample of 1 or 2 types of these contracts and how they work. For example, a public authority may ask one of our members, what it will do first, it will actually put a tender out and invite different companies to compete for that tender. And whoever wins will be asked to, for example, design and build a wastewater treatment plant, operate and build, you know, a network for 10 years, and then hand it over to the full control of the municipality. That's kind of called a build, operate, transfer, or a design, build, and operate type contract. And in that case, for example, I think once we've built the treatment plants and we've created a network of new users who are going to use the sewer system, that's how we kind of repay back the investment. So the private company will take the money in the first few years to pay back, and, you know, the costs that it's put in. And then after that, after a certain time, contractually agreed, it will be handed over to the full control of the public authority. There are other times though, and in that situation, a lot of the time it's the public authority that will seek the financing for it. It will seek the money for it, whether it's through taxation or whether it goes to the public authority will go to the loan, get a loan from a World Bank or an institutional bank, Asian Development Bank, somewhere like that. There's various sources of where the money for that project will come from to pay the private operator to do the work. In other cases, the private operator will also bring in the finance with it. Our members don't tend to do it that often, actually. We much prefer usually that the public authority kind of seeks the finance and obtains the finance. We feel much more kind of comfortable in that way, but not always the case. So sometimes we bring the financing as well, and we kind of, again, we take regular payments from tariffs, for example, or users of the service for a certain period of time to pay back the investment and our costs, and then we hand it back over to the public authority. So again, I think, you know, I've probably said it about 20 times now already, but the key message is that it's the public authority that must and should and does retain full control. If you jump down, I think the third bullet from the end on the slide there, it says decisions on tariffs and investment are taken by the public authority. And again, we'll get onto this later, but again, it's a key point now that I'm really keen to stress, which is that prices and the level of investment and the cost of investment, that is a decision taken by the public authority. The private operator shouldn't really have the decision on and the ability to put prices up or down. That must be agreed by the public authority. And this is a common misconception that, again, people say, oh, well, they brought a private operator in and the prices went up. There's reasons for that, and which we'll get onto in a minute, but the price rise would have and must have been agreed by the public authority, and that they must retain full control and take responsibility, because it's the public authority that is on the hook for delivering SDG 6. Okay, and all the other SDGs, and it's the public authority that has the responsibility for the human right to water and sanitation. Guys like my guys, they are there to help the public authority deliver that. The second last bullet here is about strong governance, and for this I mean things like transparency of how the contract is established in the first place, what's in that contract, the value of the contract with the private operator. We want that public, because it makes no sense for us for that to be hidden at all. We also want, the clear lines of accountability in terms of, so the public are clear and the users are clear what the private company is responsible for and what the public authority is responsible for. Transparency in terms of utility operations are absolutely essential. And even today, AquaFed, a lot of our work is just built on promoting what good transparency and good governance looks like, even now, even in Europe, let alone a developing world, let alone, middle income countries. This is even in Europe. We're still fighting this battle for better transparency. So we, certainly in Europe, we shouldn't be arrogant at all to think that we've nailed this, because we certainly haven't. And the level of transparency and around performance of the utilities, whether public or private, really does differ quite a lot as well. And you'll see some countries like England and France, where the private operators are, there's huge amounts of public information out there, and that's absolutely right. It should be there. But in other countries, we don't see that, despite our efforts to try and make that happen. Governance, another key issue about governance, and I'll leave it there, is that everyone needs to be clear in terms of the regulatory framework and the legal framework, and who the regulators are, what they regulate, and is there a very clear separation of all their responsibilities? Because again, that's absolutely crucial. And the most important thing about regulation is that it gives the public trust and confidence in their water and sanitation, and trust and confidence that it's going to be regulated properly. And that's very, very important. Sorry, I'll take a pause there for just a second, because I've just thrown a lot at you about my members. But Marion, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on from what my companies do, or the companies I represent, we're going to go into different types now. So this is where a lot of the confusion comes in sometimes, or people's kind of, what's the word? They put many things in the same bucket, and they put my companies in with the same kind of viewpoint as the commodity producers, such as Coke, and you see the bottled water companies and the alcohol companies below, who are huge users of water. But these are companies that operate in a very different way, because they're not working on behalf of a public authority. They're operating on behalf of themselves, quite frankly, and they're working for their own shareholders, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and they have very different kind of frameworks that we follow. They can get water from the ground if they get abstraction permits from the municipality or the government. So they work in a very, very different way from us. So yeah, that's just to say a very clear distinction between Coca-Cola, very different to what Veolia and Suez and my members do. Okay, so I just wanted to be clear on that. Suraj, thank you for your question already, and I will obviously come back to that later. I see some questions coming in, that's great. Thanks, Marion. Okay, yeah, next slide. So let me tell you first of all, that you may be wondering what that picture is. So it's not someone's kind of line hanging up washing. It looks like they're in the middle of the desert. Some of you may know that that is a kind of new tech that's being developed, which is, well, that one I think is called by a company called Thin Air. And they're literally trying to catch the dew in the morning and the morning moisture in the mountains, and create pure water from it. And that looks like a biotech skin they're trying to do. So perhaps some of you know this better than me already, but Why have I got this on? It's because the next type of kind of private sector grouping I'm looking at is the innovators and the tech people, who are actually, maybe some of you, and I'll be really fascinated to find out if that is you today, but this is the future, you know, the technology and innovation. On the right-hand side, that thing you may recognize is a smart meter. Again, and this is what the investors are looking to put their money in now. It's not kind of big sewer networks or big water networks. It's this kind of new way of working, a new way of operating. This is where the excitement is at the moment. So the engineers and the innovators are another grouping, completely separate from the other two I've just mentioned, the other two groups, another potential kind of group of private sector. Engineering firms, innovation firms, tech firms, startups, you know, this is where a lot of the action is and needs to be a lot more in the future. And these are the type of companies, hopefully, that can attract more venture capital and more private investors willing to take more risks in the future, because we see a lot of them putting their money in energy and other sectors, but not in water and sanitation. And that's one of our biggest challenges, I think, is to, you know, whether you're a private operator or a public authority, we've got to get the innovators to kind of get more excited and helping us solve our problems, as well as energy and other issues. Okay, Marion, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so I don't know if any of you have seen this before. This is the Toilet Board Coalition's sanitation economy model, and I immediately apologize for the size of the slides. You probably can't read that, but if you haven't seen this already, please go and visit the Toilet Board Coalition's website immediately. It even sounds funny, right? The Toilet Board Coalition. It's quite an amusing title. However, this is something that is backed by very many big businesses and institutional banks and donor agencies. It's got the whole kind of spectrum of stakeholders backing it. And this is basically looking at the future of sanitation and moving it far away from where it is now. And because I think the Toilet Board Coalition's basic model is, look, at the moment, governments see sanitation as a cost, as a draw on resources. And what the Toilet Board is saying is, let's turn that right on its head. Let's disrupt that, and let's think about what comes out of a toilet, you know, what comes out of a human being immediately as a resource and the spin-offs that it can create. And this is trying to basically unlock every single little part of the value chain imaginable, from basically a basic human bodily function. And you can see it here. And I strongly recommend it. And this brings me to my fourth point, you know, who else is in the private sector? Well, this is backed by people like Unilever, who create things like detergents and soaps, Kimberly-Clark, who do nappies, tissues, Tata, again, who do kind of biological products, but, you know, even like toilet builders and people who manufacture secure plastic cartridges, which hopefully can be recycled, that can be used in a kind of broken up sanitation model, whereby the toilet is just the start, and there's a value chain of collection, of treatment, and what you do with it. You know, the Toilet Board are even saying that actually that you should be able to start collecting the feces and, you know, mining it for health data, because there's all sorts of things that, you know, feces can tell you, apparently. I don't know too much about this, and I'm not going to talk about it too much, but because it's quite disgusting. But, you know, as you guys, I think, already know, there's so much out there that can be mined. So this model is great. I think hopefully, you know, this could and should be the future. I mean, the Toilet Board Coalition think that the sanitation economy, these three areas, are worth $62 billion in India by 2021. I mean, albeit some of it's already happening, but it's that's quite a lot of money, actually, and that really is flipping it all on its head. So you can see all sorts of type of people wanting to be involved, and perhaps we can get into that later. But again, I apologise that the drawing is so small, but I really strongly recommend you look at the Toilet Board Coalition's website. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, okay, the last one. So private investors. So as we know, sadly, we have got a huge funding gap between what we need to deliver the SDGs, particularly SDG 6, and what currently is being made available. We're simply not able to attract huge, you know, the trillions of private sector capital that's out there. Again, it goes to energy and it goes to other SDGs, goes to sustainable development into cities, but it's not coming to SDG 6, unfortunately. Many reasons for that, which is probably a subject of another discussion. But Who are these? Where is this big money come from? The big sources of private money that can be used, hopefully one day in our sector, is pension funds, global pension funds from all over the world. They're huge, these funds, absolutely massive. They do invest in some countries. They invest in the US water companies and big time in the English water sector. There are reasons for that. I think, again, probably a subject of a whole other discussion as well, but they do invest where they see things like good governance frameworks, they see stable regulatory regimes, and they see companies that were able to recover any type of investment quickly. So there is an attraction there, but the private investors, we need more of those. Sometimes you get commercial bank lending into putting their money into investment funds into water projects, but again, not often enough. Huge talk now about green bonds and impact bonds. And everyone wants to talk about this, and everyone wants to talk about, this is a form of blended finance and very exciting. Yes, I get that, but it's still, I think, in terms of coming to the water sector, still in its infancy. And I'm still not, there's still a few things we need to do before we start seeing big flows of green, value from green bonds coming into the sector. And venture capital as well, and I mentioned that before. It's something that I'm personally very interested in, and it's not coming to our sector at the moment. And it's not as if we don't have the technology and the innovation and the ideas, but it's something I think we need to all think about. And why are we not attracting these investors that are willing to take a bigger risk and to develop things and move them on? It's just not happening at the moment. The last thing I'd say, and again, I think I've said it before, is just that bottom bullet point about payback and cash flow. So apologies if some of you are not financially minded and are thinking, what on earth is he talking about? It's basically this. It's about, if you have to invest in a water network or getting, say, 5,000 people hooked up onto a water, getting tap water or onto a sewer network, it costs money and it's huge costs up front. But what happens so often is the money's there, but it doesn't come because the authority, whether it's a public authority or the government, is unable to generate, it doesn't charge enough money usually, it doesn't charge enough price from the users, or it doesn't have enough money to pay back the investment. So the investors take their money elsewhere. So payback and cash flow is very, very important. But perhaps we can get onto that in questions, and I can make another attempt to try and explain that a little better later on. Okay, next slide, please, Marion. Thank you. Right, so let's get on to the myth busting now, and I promise the slides are nearly finished. I think this is the last two. I've put these together, profits and prices and tariffs, because they're inextricably linked, actually, and they're discussed sometimes by people in the same sentence. So let's cover profits first. And you may hear that the private sector makes huge amounts of profits. They're making billions out of water, and people, meanwhile, and people don't have water to drink, and isn't it terrible? Look, I can't speak on behalf of the commodity companies, Diageo, Coke, Nestle. I'll let them explain their financial model and what they take in profit and everything else. At this point, I can only really talk about the companies I represent. And hopefully, I think the first slide I had kind of gave the impression that essentially my companies, or the companies I represent, can only make money if I just got interrupted for a second. If they operate efficiently, right? What they need to do is, they're being paid a certain price to provide a service, and they have to make sure they run it absolutely efficiently and use their resources properly. Then they can make a small margin of around 5 to 6% above their costs, and that's what it is. And that isn't really that much. And that's why the companies who have lots of contracts and can operate at that larger scale, it's much more there's much more in it for them if they can do that. And again, the profits that they do make, they have to reinvest it all the time in R&D. There's a huge churn of investment in research and development, particularly with our biggest companies who pride themselves on it, and that is their business model. Their business model is basically built on having the latest up-to-date technology that a public authority wouldn't have. And that's where the value add comes from our members. In fact, not some, there are many publicly operated water and sanitation services, which are brilliant. Okay, you see, I've seen some in America that are absolutely superb, for example, and there's many in Europe as well, Germany and Holland. They're great. All right, and the private sector, you don't need the private sector there because they've got everything they need already, and that's absolutely fine. Because we would never say that private sector and bringing in our operators is the best solution, but sometimes it is, particularly when there's a huge technological need for it. The other issue here that comes up, and I think I mentioned it earlier, about prices and tariffs. And people say, well, as soon as you bring in the private sector, the prices go up. There is a very good reason for that, if that happens. And it's because the period before we came, it could be 10, 20 years, there was a huge lack of investment, huge underinvestment by the public authority in updating and maintaining the network that was there and getting new people on board and expanding the network. So quite often we come in and we try and fix a situation of chronic underinvestment, and that's why sometimes prices have to rise. It's unfortunate, and it's not something that anyone wants to do. And then it comes a matter of public policy, really, about how you make that affordable, and can the people who can they pay more, and can they subsidize the people who pay less, for example. And that's where you need good governance and creative and clever public management, I think. Okay, next slide, please, Marion. Okay, yeah, human right to water and sanitation. So again, another thing that I hear a lot of the time is private sector just trample all over the rights of people. They don't believe in the right to water and sanitation. I can completely understand, in some cases I've heard of things that happen in Brazil, for example, why people have said that. I learned a lot actually at the last World Water Forum, and not by anything my operators and my companies have done. It's the way that kind of water resources are being given, the contracts are being given out to, or these permits are being given out to private companies. Again, I can't speak about that. That's for Nestle and people or others who are implicated in these claims to defend. I think you've seen by now that our companies only can operate if the public authority invites them to do so by contract. And the human right to water and sanitation is something that actually AquaFed was built on way back in 2005. That's what we lobbied for. That's what we started. We have pushed very, very hard for many years to get the human right to water and sanitation recognised. And even now, we are fighting this in Europe because still EU members have not fully implemented the right to water and sanitation. And those that have don't do things what they should be doing, we feel, which is having transparent baskets of human right indicators. We've even given the European Commission this. And if you're interested, I could send these to you after. Types of indicators, public indicators that we can show people where the authority is and isn't delivering a human right to water and sanitation. So I just want you to be absolutely clear that certainly AquaFed and its members absolutely stand by the right to human right to water and sanitation. Lastly, remunicipalization. So again, this is something you may see a lot on Twitter now, or you may have seen it in conferences you've attended. There is a claim by certain stakeholders, shall we say, sort of the public sector unions, that cities particularly are going back to public operation and are kicking the private operators out. And there is some research that's been done on it as well, and I'm not doubting the research for 1 minute that's been done. What I would say is the research doesn't do from the trade unions, it doesn't give the full context of why contracts are not being renewed, or how many are not being renewed compared to how many are being given out. So there are many reasons why a public authority at the end of a contract with a private water operator then doesn't carry on the contract. It may be because simply that's the end of the contract. They don't need the private sector operator anymore. The private sector operator's done its job. That's it. Voila, it's done. Okay, the contract's finished. There may be a few cases where they were unhappy, and that's fine. That's why you have these type of contracts, and that's why you have accountability. And that if the private water operator hasn't performed, you kick them out. That's fine. Okay, and there may be other instances whereby the contract has finished, and the public authority would like to retender and ask another private operator to come, but the private operators may not want to as well. So there's lots of different reasons for making it happen. I think the one thing that concerns me is that we've seen is that when decisions are taken on ideological grounds and not on what people actually need and where the best performance is going to be, And that's what worries me. And I think there have been a few high-profile cases in the past, recent past, that have been more about ideology rather than what really matters, which is good service to the people. So I would just, when you hear the claims of remunicipalization, I would say, you know, there's two sides to that story, and there's still a huge churn of contracts being given out to private operators every year to do what is, you know, a good and valued job. And what you need to make sure is, whether it's a public authority or a private operator, that the public, the people, you and me, can make sure that our operator is doing the best job possible. Okay, I'm going to pause. I think that's it for the slide. Sorry, I've talked for much longer than I thought I was going to. I hope you're still with me, and I hope that made some sense. And I guess we can get into some questions now, right?
Yes, we'll get some questions. So let me check them. So the first one is from Suraj, who asks you, do private water operators provide job in the local market? And what about the capacity building to local water services providers?
Yeah, great question. Yes, they do. I think what happens is, if it's a new market, if they're going into a new country, what might happen is that some of the people who are going to be in charge of it are going to be people who have worked for that company in other areas of the world before, because they've got the experience of setup. But I know absolutely for, particularly for the members, our members who are global operators, again, I'm talking about Veolia and Suez in particular, they measure themselves, and it's very important to them that they create a kind of lasting legacy of where they are. And local job creation and upskilling of people is very, very, very important. It's not just about, you know, philanthropy or kind of being nice because it's good for corporate social responsibility. Forget all that crap. It's actually good business sense. If you want to have contracts and the option of renewing it in the long term, you build the local workforce up and you upskill them, and you can still retain some sort of, you know, control and value add from where you are back in, say, the office in Paris, for example. But it's really important that you build the local knowledge and the local skills base, because also then you get the acceptance of the local people and they feel much more part of it. And again, that's good for business. Never mind anything else. That's just good, straightforward, good business decision. So it's very, very important. In terms of capacity building, yes, again, I think a good private operator will do that, and I've seen plenty of good examples of where that happens. In fact, AquaFed's done a booklet, we particularly focused on women in jobs as well. We've done some reports on that not too long ago, so it's something that's very, very important to us. I think, you know, if you have a local private operator, what you find a lot of the time, it's the same engineers and the same technicians who perhaps were before working for the public company and now working for the private one. So it's kind of interchangeable a lot of the time. But the short answer to your question is, it's absolutely crucial, and it's something that our operators measure themselves on.
Okay, then we have another question from Christopher, was asking, there are PPP for water and sanitation provision in Southeast Asia who have problem with their regulators. Can I provide aid in this kind of situation? If yes, what kind?
So what was the last bit about providing?
Provide help, sorry.
Yeah, it was, so it's PPP, hang on, so I've just found the question, so I got it, yeah.
So
okay. Yeah, okay. So Christopher, thanks for your question. We have members at the moment in the Philippines, and there's a kind of thriving market. I think that's one of the success stories of PPPs at the moment. It's kind of almost booming out there. There's been problems in other countries. In Indonesia, for example, I know in Jakarta, it didn't quite go well, shall we say, for various reasons. But yes, so we're there. There are other private companies who sadly aren't members of AquaFed that we'd like them in, who are in and around Philippines and Malaysia and Singapore. But yes, AquaFed does provide aid for them. We help them in wherever we can, however we can. Particularly AquaFed's expertise, like I said, it's not necessarily operational and technical. It's more about governance and political frameworks, and something we're very, very keen on, which is about user and citizen engagement. Because in my experience, particularly working in the UK, it's so important to get users understanding their own responsibilities and their own and their expectations of what, you know, a water operator should provide for them. It's really, really crucial. But so, you know, for example, you know, we are facing water shortages all over the world, and someone has got to try and tell users to try and use less. Sometimes, you know, in the UK, it's, you know, we say to people, drop 20% less water. You can only do that if you have engagement and kind of buy-in from your users. And to do that, you have to communicate with them properly. So that's something, you know, and communicate with them properly, and also involve them in the decisions that get made. And that last point about involving them in decisions get made, I very rarely see good practice in that anywhere in the world. I think parts of Europe, parts of the UK, for example, are pretty good at it, but even then we have got a long way to go, let alone everywhere else. I think a chronic problem that water and sanitation sector suffers from is talking almost down to users, and we just do not do enough of understanding their needs and what's possible, and it would make a huge difference. Sorry for my digression and my suddenly turning into some sort of evangelical sermon there, but it's something I passionately believe in, which is about user engagement.
Thank you, Neil. We have another question from Nathan, who is in India, and I was asking about small local private companies who have done some kind of innovations. And I believe that she's asking about how they can get involved when in general the government is asking a minimum annual turnover or past experience of implementation or similar innovation. How can they their space?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question that I certainly don't have the answer for, and all I can say is that it's a frustration that I share. I mean, I think I'm not singling out India, and don't get me wrong, actually I'm of Indian heritage, so even I'm British, you know, I'm a non-resident Indian, and I want to see nothing more than India be a world leader in water and sanitation, and I believe Modi's really trying. However, there is this on-the-ground problem when it comes to the reality of innovators trying to promote what they've got. It is very, very difficult. Nitin, please, I would say that if you are involved in innovation and tech in some way, one place you should definitely go, and if it's in the sanitation sector, go talk to the Toilet Board Coalition, because they're doing some great stuff in India. And even if you're not there and you're not quite involved in it, I would say the Toilet Board are a good place to kind of go talk to anyway. What we can do, you and I can do, perhaps we could take this offline, and hopefully my details will be somewhere, or Marion and Rebecca will help us get in touch. We can take this offline and talk a bit more about what we might do in terms of a strategy of doing that, and how tenders can be given and how to approach the government. So I'm sorry I don't have the silver bullet magical answer now. All I can say, I think it is very, very frustrating, and I still see, you know, public authorities and governments and municipalities not understanding the conditions that are required for innovators to succeed, particularly in our sector.
Okay, thank you, Neil. I think we'll send an email to all the participants with the slides and also information for Neil if you have further questions. Yeah. Right now we have a question from, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, Yogin, was asking, how do you balance human rights, access to water, and making them understand the value to water?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is absolutely a great question, and this is something that comes up in these multiple, you know, water conferences that happen day in, day out all over the world. I think, you know, sometimes I think the water industry is very good at keeping the aviation industry in business, but anyway, that's an aside. This is a great question. Because yes, you're right. There are some people, and I've heard them say this, that basically water is a human right. We shouldn't pay anything for it. It should be free because it comes down from God or comes from the sky. and it's ours. In one sense, yes, absolutely right. What we try and do is explain to people that if we don't protect our resources, and if people don't pay a fair price for the treatment of that water to have it delivered to them safely, then their human rights are compromised and their human rights doesn't exist. That's kind of the basic level argument we try and use. Perhaps it's not a particularly convincing one, and there's some people we can never convince. And I say we, private authorities, private operators, public authorities, we are in the same basket here of trying to make people understand that water is not just, it's not free in the sense that it's our water, but you need to pay a tariff of some kind for it to be brought to you in some sort of way that's okay and fit for human health. And that's where the misunderstanding happens. And that's where people think also that they can just carry on abstracting and pumping the water out of the ground. And I know this is an issue I think in Nigeria, for example, but India's the same. India, people can just dig a well, you can just pump the ground dry. And, it's a personal view. I just think that's completely unsustainable. And it's actually massively compromising people's human rights. And they may get water in the short term, but in the long term, there's not going to be anything left for them. So what happens to their human right then? It's gone. So it's very massive, difficult challenge for us to get people to do that. And it's a challenge, particularly when it comes from, you hear it from a private operator trying to tell you that, because people just say, hey, you fix your leakage first, yeah, and you go and fix your profits and cut your profits down, then I might think about reusing water less. And that's where the kind of the impasse and the kind of the debate becomes kind of two heads bang against each other, which is quite difficult sometimes.
Thank you, Neil. We have a question from Shabana, and she's asking, she's curious to know how AquaFeds as a network measures its success, and what are your key performance indicators?
Yes, thank you, Shabana, for that question. I hope you're well. And remind me to ask you some difficult questions next time, young lady. Okay, so how do we measure our success? So we are AquaFed itself, and the team that I've got, it's a tiny team. We are accountable to our member companies. And what they put us on account for, it's nothing to do with any kind of commercial activity. Legally, we're not allowed to get involved in anything that is in any way trying to create commercial value for our members, and our members are the first people to say, don't do that, don't get in our way, that's not AquaFed's job. What they hold us accountable for is our relationships with stakeholders, people like you, Shabana, for example, and to make sure that we are, as AquaFed, really, we can demonstrate that we've represented members' views in forums that are important, on subjects that are important to our members. And I think I've covered most of them already. I think the human right to water and sanitation is what AquaFed was built on. The other thing is really the key simple answer that our members hold us accountable for is how have we presented the private sector as a possible option for governments to think about when needing to deliver SDG targets. And our members will always say, look, demonstrate to us which conversations you've had, how have you promoted the value of private sector expertise, and that's it. That's what we're accountable for. So sometimes it's very subjective measures. They're not particularly, you can't really convert them into metrics. It's more of a feeling. But I think our member companies are not stupid people, and they can tell whether we have or haven't been able to really represent their views and have the private sector voice heard. And I think it's very important for them that AquaFed has a reputation of being helpful and being knowledgeable and being, positioned in the right places, I think, but to give a very sensible, rational and calm message about the private sector and not push hard. And I think they want us to show humility all the time. That's why, if you listen to me, hopefully you're not seeing someone who's like a salesman, because that's not what we do. I just try and present both sides of, the pros and cons of what we can do, and then let you decide. Hopefully I've answered your question, Shabana.
Okay, thank you. There's Rebecca was asking about innovation in the private sector. Do you feel the private sector as it is today is conducive for WASH innovation? And what do you think is needed to foster more innovation?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I do. I do definitely think the private sector, one thing we can, all of us, I mean, you know, ourselves, the Nestle's, Diageo's, etc., Coca-Cola, users water, it is a good home for innovation, definitely. I feel in no doubt about that whatsoever. I mean, some of the technology that certainly our biggest members have, it's just breathtaking. It's absolutely fantastic. And I think it's, I do think it's conducive for WASH innovation, because that is what they're trying to do. Where I think I hinted at this already, and it comes to your second part of your question, Rebecca, which is what's needed to foster more innovation. One of the big problems is at the moment is that innovators need finance to get their ideas off the ground. And I still don't quite understand why, but the innovators have not been able to so far get venture capitalists, for example, and other riskier types of capital really excited about what these guys are trying to do, which I'm very excited about, because, you know, having, for example, schools in India that can treat wastewater on site and you know, create gas on site enough to at least power up the school, for example, and, you know, have reused clean water. What is not exciting about that? So I feel very passionate about it, and the innovators feel very passionate about it, but somehow we're not being able to make our case. And again, it's something it frustrates me on a daily basis, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is really. I think, so the other thing I think in terms of what could foster innovation, I think public authorities could do more, I think, to create the kind of marketplaces for innovators to mix together. Now I sit on the Sanitation and Water for All. It's a UN partnership, and in the private sector, we've got a couple of brilliant companies there. It's a company called Waterpreneurs, and some of you may have bumped into these guys because they're everywhere. They are trying to help local innovators, you know, some of these, and from the basis of a kind of a social, you know, a grassroots, bottoms up, you know, technology, really basic, sometimes people who are living and working locally to use the technology and their experience and innovate as well and try and find their money. But I think it needs facilitation at this level now from municipalities and certainly regional governments to unearth the kind of tech talent that's already there, because I bet you in any country in the world there are people who have got answers. Sometimes it's high tech, sometimes it's medium or low tech, but there are people that are answers. And I think that's that facilitation now. We've got, I think in the water sector, we've got the high level policy fixed. We know what we're trying to do. I think we need to move it down 5 or 6 notches and let's get into the ground and the roots and deliver kind of facilitation at that level. That's what's really important. Sorry, I went on a bit of a ramble in the end as well. I apologize. When I get passionate about things, I tend to get quite excited and stop making sense. But hopefully that made, Rebecca, that answers your question.
Thank you. So we have a question from Ritu, who's asking what aspect of sanitation does AquaFed, a new member, cover? Is it limited to sewage network, or you also looked at aspects like on-site sludge sanitation management?
Yeah, it's everything. Ritu, thanks for your question. It's absolutely everything. It's certainly not just sewerage networks anymore. You're absolutely right. And it's very interesting you raised that point, because I think our members realise, and one of our members, particularly Veolia, has realised, because it's joined the Toilet Board Coalition, that sewer networks are just simply not the answer in all cases, because in many cases they're just never going to be affordable. And that type of on-site sludge management, fecal sludge management, and everything you can do, it goes back to the Toilet Board Coalition point earlier. It's looking at every single part of the value chain from the moment it comes out of a human being, basically the stuff, and what you can do with it, and at a low cost, you know, and innovative ways of doing. And I think this is exactly what Bill Gates was saying, not 2 weeks ago, right? In his reinventing the toilet stuff that came out. He's absolutely right. We use potable water, drinking water in many countries to flush a toilet. How ridiculous, you know, utterly ridiculous. And we need to get away from that as soon as possible. So AquaFed, like I think everyone else, is trying to look at what are the alternatives to sewer networks, and we're just waiting for people to develop these things, and our guys are trying to do that just as much as everyone else.
Okay, good. I will have a question myself.
Yep.
Is what have you seen are the key to success for the private sector in water and sanitation supplies? Is it just making profits? And if yes, how do you ensure you make profits? And do you have example of successes and failure?
It's certainly not just about profits. It's because you have to think, this is a long-term business, right? It's not like a .com thing, yeah? Water and sewerage and sanitation rather is long-term stuff. And that's the way that our companies approach it. I mean, some of these guys will have contracts 10 or 12 years, you know, and looking beyond that as well. So it's a long-term business. I think that the building blocks of, if we're talking about what makes private operations successful, a fundamental building block is governance. And that's for a public company or public, provided operations as well as private. It doesn't matter. That's absolutely crucial. I make the point yet again about transparency. And I make the point yet again about customer decision-making or user decision-making, sorry, because they're not customers in all cases. It's users, however you want to describe it. People like you and me, we should be able to directly influence and shape our water and sanitation services. Is absolutely crucial. So I think those are the building blocks. From there, if you have clear regulatory frameworks and clear responsibilities, again, that's stable and that stops, forgive me for being direct, but it stops politicians meddling in water and sanitation services so quickly, and it keeps the politicians away as much as possible. That is the kind of thing that gives actually customers or users and investors much more trust and confidence in a sector, again, whether it's private or public, it doesn't really matter. For private operators, then, if they're called in and they're invited, they will make profit if they can find the best ways of operating the service, still providing all the quality that's required, but at lower costs. And sometimes that does mean, operating with less people. And that's the kind of thing that perhaps trade unions don't always like. And I can understand why, but it's about really delivering the best service for the customers and at the best price. And that's what's really, really important. So, and then I think after that, it's about taking a long-term view and being transparent and clear about performance when operators are doing it. Because if they don't manage all those things, it's very difficult for them to be called back. And the reputation of themselves and the whole of the private operators all suffer. So profits is one thing, but to get to a good profit, there's many, many things you've got to build on. And I think the last point I'd say, and it's very, very crucial, is about the partnership level and the aspects of working with the public authorities. And now you find that actually the senior people from our biggest companies, the one message that they have very much is about building partnerships on the ground. And and then we had a question from, I can't remember if it was Nitin earlier, or maybe a previous person was asking about, it's Christopher, about local capacity. That is now absolutely essential. And if private operators don't do that and build the skills locally, then they're not going to have much of a business going forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Neil. I think we've ended up just reaching 1 hour. So I think it was a good discussion, a good question. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really do believe personally that the private sector is a key to success in providing water and sanitation service in every country. So thank you so much for your presentation. For all the attendees, we'll share a video on YouTube about your presentation, and also we'll share your email, Neil, if you're okay with that, so people can ask you question directly on AquaFed.
Yeah, we've had one last question. Do we have to cut off now? Or do I have a time to answer Surage's question?
Oh, yes, you can.
Yeah. Okay. So he's asking, what happens after operators hand over their work? Do they run as they're running before, or they start to plummet? No, I don't have any examples to hand. I'm very sorry. And I think, quite honestly, if I did, where it went bad after we left, I probably would be a bit, I don't know, I would be a bit hesitant to name call anything. I'm not sure. I think in most cases, I think I have to give respect to the public authorities here. And I think in most cases, what we've found is that once we've set up a system, operated and handed it over, it then hands over and it carries on. And it may come back to us again 10 years later to come back in or whatever. But I haven't seen, it's not something that our members tell me, yeah, God, as soon as we hand it over, it all goes terrible. That's not what I hear at all.
I don't see any more questions. So I think we'll finish here. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Neil, again for your presentation. It was really great. We'll keep in touch and we'll send information to all the attendees.
Yeah.
Thank you, and
thanks, everyone. Thank you.
and have a great evening, everyone.
Okay. Thanks.